What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to my channel. Now that the Suicide Squad is out, it's time to rank all 11 films in the DCEU from worst to best. So before we begin, let me know in the comments what your ranking of the DCEU movies were. As always, this is just my list, not a definitive ranking. And please be respectful in the comments. I know these films in particular are very divisive. We are going to disagree, and that's okay, but let's be respectful about it. Also, before we jump in, make sure to hit that thumbs up button if you like these ranking videos, as it helps me out immensely by getting my channel out there. And if you're new here, I hope you consider hitting that subscribe button so you can stay up to date with more movie-related content on a near-daily basis. But let's not waste any more time, and let's jump into the list. In last place is Batman vs. Superman: Dawn of Justice, a film that suffers from trying to be three things at once: a Man of Steel sequel, a Justice League prequel, and a showdown between the two title characters. And it is just all over the place. And before you ask, yes, I did see the Ultimate Edition, and for me, it's just a more complete version of a tonally uneven film. I don't think it's an outright terrible movie, but it's incredibly unfocused, and whenever there is some sense of focus, it didn't totally work, with its overly depressing tone, its emphasis on trying to sound more philosophical than it actually is, and with Jesse Eisenberg as Lex Luthor getting very annoying very quickly. With it only being the second DCEU film, it was a clear sign of DC being caught with their pants down and simply trying to play catch up with Marvel rather than actually trying to tell a great story, making for what I feel is a misfire of a film. At number 10 is Wonder Woman 1984, a decent enough, though still disappointing follow-up to the 2017 hit. The film suffers from an unimaginative plot with two villains who weren't quite done justice, with Cheetah playing into a trope reminiscent of Poison Ivy and Batman and Robin, or Electro and Amazing Spider-Man 2, while Maxwell Lord is just a guy who becomes a wish machine, and that's about it. While both Kristen Wiig and Pedro Pascal were fine, and their performances do elevate the material, the characters themselves could have been written a lot better. Meanwhile, there were a lot of cool fight scenes that were genuinely entertaining, but everything in between felt dragged out, while the storyline between Diana and the revived Steve Trevor was one that wasn't fully thought through and was kind of creepy when you think about it. I don't think it's an outright bad movie, but it's one that I don't find myself wanting to immediately revisit. At number 9 is Suicide Squad, a film that I don't think is truly as bad as everyone says it is, even if it is on the weaker end of the DCEU films. The film's biggest strengths lie in its cast, especially Will Smith and Margot Robbie, who provide a much-needed sense of levity that was lacking in the previous film, Dawn of Justice. There's a strong group dynamic and some fun action scenes that make for a pretty solid, if still flawed, first half. But where the film loses steam is that once it hits the hour mark, it does get muddled a bit. The plot starts drifting off in a few different directions, with none of it really working all that well, and it takes away from the group dynamic a bit, focusing more on conflict with a weak primary antagonist in Enchantress and a grating secondary antagonist in the Joker. So it fizzles out a bit, but the cast at least do a solid enough job to keep things afloat. While I know this was the product of studio interference, and it definitely could have done so much more, I think it's a decent enough, if inconsistent, time. At number 8 is 2017's Justice League, also known as Justice League by some, due to the fact that, despite Zack Snyder being credited as director, Joss Whedon had a lot more involvement than initially led to believe, and there was some heavy studio interference by Warner Brothers. Now, I will make it clear that I do not appreciate how much Warner Brothers had their hands in this one, and a lot of fans have turned around and said they hate the movie on that principle alone. And I totally understand. But having rewatched this not too long ago, I'd be lying if I said I hated the final product, because I really don't. I don't like what Warner Brothers did, but I don't dislike the movie itself. While it can certainly move way too quickly, I did like the emphasis on trying to have some fun, with its solid action scenes and sense of humor. And for the record, personally, I'd much rather see a superhero movie try to be too funny rather than be joyless and somber. But this still did have its issues, like a weak villain in Steppenwolf, as well as some thinly written storylines, and a lot of that would be corrected with the next film on this list. And that would be the Snyder Cut, which is the vision for the story Zack Snyder originally had in mind, brought to fruition by a fan-led movement. While I just got through saying I don't mind the 2017 cut, I will say this is the better film, mainly due to the fact it tells a much more complete story. Steppenwolf's motivations are made clearer, character arcs are fleshed out more, it's even more visually stunning, and the action scenes felt even more epic. That being said, it's also a 4-hour movie, which winds up both being a good and bad thing. While it does flesh everything it needed to out, you also had subplots placed in here that were long enough to be their own film, which speaks to the larger problem Warner Brothers had, especially in the early days of the DCEU, where they tried cramming in as much as possible just to catch up with Marvel, rather than focus on proper world building. Plus, I'm honestly not a huge fan of when Zack Snyder's totally left up to his own devices, and here we get way too many scenes of him just doing his usual slow-mo to give a more dramatic feel, but for sequences where it didn't feel quite necessary. So it definitely overstays its welcome at times. That being said, it is a good movie overall, maybe not quite one I'll immediately want to sit back down with again right away due to its length, but I like it and respect it, and I'm glad Snyder at least got to tell the story he wanted to tell. At number 6 is Man of Steel, the film that kicked everything off and was a solid jumpstart to the DCEU, mainly due to the fact that it was originally conceived as a standalone story. Warner Brothers really didn't start fast-tracking a cinematic universe until after this film was already made, so what we got here was a film strictly focused on just building the Superman lore, and for the most part, it succeeds. While it does try a bit too hard to imitate the feel of a Christopher Nolan movie, who by the way did produce the film, and maybe it can be a bit too somber at times, it's actually a lot more endearing than people give it credit for. Henry Cavill makes for a great Superman, it's beautifully filmed, including a fantastic opening sequence on Krypton, it's inspiring at times and even a little emotional, and despite some criticism directed towards the amount of destruction that happens towards the end, I will go out on a limb to defend that, considering this is meant to be a story about Superman figuring himself out, rather than it being about an already established Superman who would know what to do in these sort of situations and would not make these mistakes. So I like the way the film showed us how he got there and how he had to learn the hard way. Throw in one of the DCEU's best villains in General Zod, and you get a compelling, gripping superhero movie that serves as a strong start to the DCEU. At number 5 is Aquaman, a silly underwater adventure that feels like something that belonged in the 1980s, and that's exactly what I loved about it. Now don't get me wrong, this can be heartfelt and emotional at times, and it does have some solid conflict both with Ocean Master and with Black Manta, but this is a film that knows exactly what kind of movie it is and just wants you to go with it and have some fun, which is something the DCEU desperately needed at that point in my view. Jason Momoa was easily one of the best casting choices in this cinematic universe so far, and this is a great example of why. While you can take him seriously, he's as charismatic as ever and also brings with him enough winking self-awareness to give you some good laughs without it coming off as too forced or anything. Throw in some epic underwater battles, giant sea creatures, and the likes of Patrick Wilson, Willem Dafoe, and Nicole Kidman, among many others, and you have an awesome first solo adventure that does Aquaman justice. At number 4 is Birds of Prey, a wacky, chaotic film with tons of visual flair that made for a fast-paced, wild ride. With the extended focus on Harley Quinn, at times it does feel more like a solo movie that just so happens to feature the Birds of Prey, rather than being a true ensemble film, but everyone else does get their moment to shine, at least once, between Black Canary, Huntress, and Renee Montoya, all elevated by some really solid supporting performances. Though of course, at the center of it all is Margot Robbie, who absolutely crushes it with a charming, hilarious lead performance, while Ewan McGregor is also pretty solid as the villain Black Mask. While this does have its issues, what really sells it for me is its playful tone, continuing the direction taken by the last few films in the DCU to lighten things up a bit and have some fun. Between its wonderful sense of humor and catchy soundtrack, it felt like a mix of Deadpool and Guardians of the Galaxy with maybe a little John Wick thrown in there. It's loud, colorful, and in your face, but that's all part of its charm. At number 3 is Wonder Woman, and while I obviously don't dislike all of the early DCEU entries, I'd say this was the first one to properly mix heart, humor, and excitement to give us some old-school action-packed popcorn entertainment. Though it does contain an emotionally compelling storyline as well, with Diana's quest to try finding the god of war Ares and stopping him so she can do something meaningful. While the early DCEU films were known more for their darker feel, this is the first time in this universe where optimism consistently shined through, with its emphasis on solid character interactions as well as its spirited nature, mixed with some really well done pulpy action scenes. Though where I do think it kind of falters a bit is its ending, as it comes somewhat out of nowhere and can feel very jarring, which is what prevented it from taking an even higher spot on this list. But it doesn't tank the movie by any means, and it's still incredibly entertaining, making for the brightest spot in the DCEU's early days. At number 2 is Shazam, a film that is the antithesis of the DCEU's early days, placing a lot of emphasis on having fun and maintaining a positive outlook. Though of course it's not totally void of any conflict, stakes, or emotions, but this is easily one of the most character-driven films in this universe so far, with two relatable protagonists in Billy Batson and Freddie Freeman. And it's also one of the funniest DCEU entries, with a much more laid-back tone and a focus on visual gags, misunderstandings, and reactions. And that's especially due to Zachary Levi's performance in what's easily one of his best roles to date, and one that properly showcases how much of a comedic talent he truly is, with Jack Dylan Grazer also providing a lot of great support as well. Now, while this doesn't contain one of the strongest DCEU villains in Dr. Zavanna, Mark Strong did what he could with the material, and despite only having so much to work with, he does make him considerably more interesting than the character actually was. So that I appreciated. But at the heart of this film are the themes of family and finding a sense of belonging, which makes it very relatable, and it's all done in a light, breezy, but still emotionally impactful way that makes it one of the DCEU's very best films. But in first place is The Suicide Squad, an absolutely bonkers adventure from the mind of James Gunn, who was granted creative freedom to do just about whatever he wanted, and this showed all of his wildest tendencies on full display. This is an action-packed, blood-soaked, graphically violent film with tons of dark humor that will have us laughing, but at the same time, feeling bad for what we're laughing at. Though at the end of the day, Gunn manages to once again do what he did with Guardians of the Galaxy, which is take these incredibly weird B and C tier list characters, most of whom audiences are probably just hearing about for the first time with this movie, and give them these emotionally compelling arcs that we can care about, and arguably to better results than Guardians if you ask me, as much as I love those films. The cast is absolutely stacked, with everyone from returning stars Margot Robbie and Joel Kinnaman, to DCEU newcomers Idris Elba and John Cena, and even to James Gunn regulars like Nathan Fillion and Michael Rooker, all doing a wonderful job here. And they're backed by some absolutely wild visuals and even a surprising bit of satire thrown in there. It's hilarious, exciting, thrilling, and emotional, and it comes in as my number 1 favorite film in the DCEU. And that's my ranking of the DCEU. I know we're probably going to disagree on a number of these, if not all of them, but like I said, please be respectful in the comments, as I know these films in particular have left people pretty divided, but I hope we'll be able to have some fun talking about them. In the meantime though, let me know, what's your ranking of the DCEU? Did you agree with this list at all? Did you disagree with it completely? Let me know in the comments below so we can discuss. Also, if you enjoyed this video, please like it and share it, and for more movie reviews and film discussion, please make sure to hit that subscribe button to stay updated. Thanks for watching everyone, and keep having fun with film.